All right, everyone. So since we've read chapters 1 and 2 of Blue this week, I want to talk about something that you might have noticed. And in order to talk about it, I want to start by reading 4 different parts of chapters 1 and 2 and see if you guys notice anything. I knew Daddy would expect me to act like a lady if he was staying home. When I turned 13, he started telling me it was time to learn some things from my mama and quit tagging after him all the time. Now he was telling me to wear breeches, which should have made me happy, but wearing breeches so I could take the place of my daddy wasn't the same as wearing them so I could climb trees. Okay, here's the second one. Then we walked to the parking lot, where our neighbor, Junior Bledsoe, was waiting for us in Daddy's truck. Junior is 17 years old. He's the man of his house, too, ever since his daddy's heart gave out a few years ago. Junior and his mama don't have a car or truck, and my mama don't have a driver's license. So Daddy'd give his pickup to Junior to use while he's gone, as long as Junior helps look after us, which Junior would do anyhow, on account of that's just how he is. He's got a big heart, for one thing, not to mention he dearly loves being in charge. When we was driving away from the train station, we seen the man that give Mama the money. That's when I knew he couldn't serve in the war, and why he got that softness in his voice when he talked about his child. Okay, so that was the second one. And this is the third one. I sat on the cold concrete step, rocking myself and praying Daddy would walk out of the Johnny house any minute. I told myself maybe he didn't really go to the war. Maybe he just needed a break from me. This is the last one. Well, I didn't think it was right for me to have to play daddy to them kids, but I knew I didn't have a choice. So I thought about what Daddy would do, and I knew he would make a game out of working. I went outside and hollered at them youngins. First one in the garden gets to pick the bedtime story. Okay, so let's talk about that. So today we're going to talk about dialect. Does anybody know what dialect is? It's okay if you don't know what dialect is. I think we should get started talking about it by watching a video.
English is spoken widely all over the world, which is pretty convenient until you realize it's not always the same English. Many people are already aware of the differences in dialect between English spoken in America versus that spoken in, for example, Britain. But even in the United States, there are dozens of dialects, all their own. Dialects evolve for many reasons and have a tendency to migrate laterally. For example, my dialect is right here, which I share with upstate New York. If I travel north or south, people start to sound a little different. We pronounce words differently and use different words for some of the same things. We might even honor different grammatical rules. Considering how expansive the United States is and how many different cultures are represented here, it's hardly surprising. Some regional terms are borrowed directly from other languages, native or otherwise, that are commonly spoken in that region. Others come about as a result of necessity to describe local phenomena or to bridge a gap in communication, such as English's infamous lack of second-person plural. Consider the creative ways English speakers have found to get around this gap. Most regions have figured out a way of quickly explaining whether they're addressing just you or yourself and your friends. Other differentiations are more mysterious. For example, why is it called Coke in Texas, soda in California, and pop in Ohio? Or this curiosity, I'm looking at you guys, Wisconsin and Rhode Island. A native speaker can pick up on a dialect quickly, and sometimes people use it to determine who you are, where you came from, and even your class or ethnicity. While some people consider dialect differences to be merely quaint, it's actually a politically charged conversation. The word dialect itself suggests that the way you say something is different or not normal. Who gets to decide the right way to say something? Implying someone's way of speaking is incorrect invalidates their way of communicating and, in essence, their culture. In reality, we all speak dialects, though some of us see our dialects in the media more than others. So the next time you hear someone refer to y'all or you guys as good friends, appreciate the differences that make English rich and interesting.
Okay, so let's go back. So one important thing you guys will notice whenever, as we're talking about dialect, is that sometimes the words we use may not be seen as grammatically correct. But I feel like it's still important that those differences are there because it, as she said, it adds to the language and it makes it more rich and different. And it's awesome. Okay, so I want to explore what dialect differences there are in our classroom. So if you say pop, I want you to raise your hand. Okay, and if you say soda, I want you to raise your hand. That's what I say. Or if you say Coke for any kind of soda, not just Coke, you call it Coke. Raise your hand. Okay. What about, do you say y'all or you all or you guys? Who says y'all? I say it sometimes. I say you guys more. Who says you guys? I say that one too. So we can see that all of us speak a little differently, even though we speak the same language. So let's move on. Dialect is a language used by people of a specific area, class, district, or any other group of people. Dialect involves spelling, grammar, or pronunciation. So in example number 2, you could see an example of grammar being used as an example of dialect. So she says, he's a man of his house too, ever since his daddy's heart give out a few years ago. And then also she says, Junior and his mama don't have a car or truck, and my mama don't have a driver's license. Another one was, so daddy give his pickup truck to Junior to use while he's gone. What do you think you would change about that? Yeah, you would say, daddy gave his pickup to Junior to use while he's gone. And the last one in this example was, when we was driving away from the train station, we seen the man that give mama the money. So what would you change about that phrase? Okay, so for the first part, you would say, when we were driving away. And then for the second part, what would you change where it says, we seen the man? Yeah, you would say, we saw the man that give mama the money. So would you change anything else? Yeah, we would change that gave mama the money. But if we changed all of those things, it might sound very different, especially because this is the way that Anne Faye spoke. So I want you guys to think about, how does dialect affect the way we perceive blue? And we're going to look at some examples first to help us answer this question. Okay. So let's look at some examples. So in one of the examples I read, she said the word Johnny house. And one thing I will say is sometimes you can guess what a word might mean if it's an example of like slang that that person might use, but you don't recognize it. Sometimes you could recognize it based off of context clues. So based off of what they say in the story before or after. But I feel like with the one that says Johnny House, it's not easy to tell what she means if you didn't know what a Johnny House is. I'll read it one more time. I sat on the cold concrete step, rocking myself and praying Daddy would walk out of the Johnny House any minute. So after reading that part, would you know what a Johnny House was based off of anything else she said? No, you wouldn't really know. Does anybody know what a Johnny House is? That's okay. We're not really familiar with them anymore. Let's see if you know what it is if you see this picture. Do you know what that is? Yeah, that's an outhouse. So a Johnny house is another word for outhouse. People used outhouses before bathrooms were inside of the home. So when she was talking about seeing Daddy walk out of the Johnny house, she was meaning the outhouse that was in their yard. Okay, so what about this one? You guys are probably familiar with what this means. Does anybody know what britches means? Yeah, britches means pants. One interesting thing about this word is it comes from the word breeches, which is a word that they used to use for pants. And then people started saying britches. Okay, and the last word, I'm sure many of you guys know what this means, especially based off of the context clues in the story. I'll read it one more time just to show you guys what I mean. Well, I didn't think it was right for me to have to play Daddy to them kids, but I didn't have a choice. So I thought about what Daddy would do, and I knew he would make a game out of working. I went outside and hollered at them youngins. First one in the garden gets to pick the bedtime story. Okay, so what does youngins mean? Yeah, it means kids. So youngins are children. The word actually came from the two words young ones, and they got pushed together. And then by spelling it the way that it's spelled, it's youngins. This is a really good example of how spelling could show us how you say a word or how somebody else would say the word. Because if you just saw young ones, you wouldn't read it as youngins. Okay, let's go back to this question. How does dialect affect the way we perceive a story? So I'm going to split you guys into groups of 3 or 4, and I want you to discuss the question, how does dialect affect the way we perceive a story with your group members? And I want you to think about how would the story look different if everything in it was grammatically correct? If everything she said was grammatically correct, would you perceive the story the same way? Would the way you view Anne Faye be different? I want you to think about that. And after you have discussed that with your group, I want you to brainstorm a list of words or phrases you use in your life that are examples of dialect. These could be words or phrases you use just with your family or just with your friends, or that you feel are familiar to people that live in North Carolina. It could be anything that you use on a regular basis. That's an example of dialect. And with your group members, I want you to write a conversation that incorporates each of your individual examples of dialect. So I want you to write as if you were talking to each other and use those words or phrases that you brainstormed in the conversation. And then after you have written it down, I want you guys to write that down just as a group so you can each write your individual parts. So you would kind of write it like a play. You would write your name and then write what you would say, and then they would write their name and they would write with what they would respond back with, and just keep it going. I want you to do at least a page or so worth of a conversation, and then with your group members, I want you to practice reading the conversations to one another, reading your parts, so as if you were talking and having the conversation. And I want you to do that to see how does it change the conversation if you didn't use those words or phrases? And does it make it feel more real or more personal? I want you to think about that as you read your conversations together. And once you're all done with that, we'll come back as a group. Okay. And the final thing that we're going to do is I want you to pull out another piece of paper, and we're going to have an exit ticket today. So before you leave, I want you to answer the question that we were thinking about earlier with all of the information you have now taken into account. So, how does dialect affect the way we perceive a story? And I want you to think about how you perceive Anne Fay as a result of dialect, how you perceive your peers whenever you were reading your conversations, whenever they put dialect in the conversation. I want you to think about that, and then I want you to write it down. And then once you are done, you are free to leave.